Welcome back to the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Thanks for taking the time with us. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. Technical support is provided by CARTS, the Corporation for Automated Road Transportation Safety, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to safe and high-quality mobility for all. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. Hi, Alain.
Hey, good morning, Fred.
Good morning. And with us from Sweden, where it is not morning, we're happy to welcome back consultant and editor of The Dispatcher, Michael Sena. Hi, Michael.
Hello, Fred. Hello, Alan. Great to be here with you again.
Yes, and it looks like it's very sunny and bright in Sweden.
Well, it's 5:35 here, but we're still getting late into the night when we still have light. So
well,
it's still
I mean,
very
don't
light
you have
here.
light until about 10 o'clock? It is just the the end of July, right?
Right now, it's about the end of around 10 o'clock. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not bad. Okay.
Yeah.
Wait a couple months. Never mind.
There is an August edition of The Dispatcher, and we didn't anticipate there would be. Michael,
Neither did I.
You change some plans around, right?
Yeah, I had the plan was this was going to be the end of a 2-week trip that included a week in the U.S. visiting friends and getting ready for a trip up to Canada to fish with a group that I have been fishing with now for 45 years.
Whoa.
Yeah, and going back to a place that we had fished between 1986 and 1996 in Labrador.
Ooh.
But I made a little short weekend vacation with my wife to Oslo, and when I came back, I tested positive to COVID. And since I was supposed to leave on a flight 2 days later, and I was in the middle of COVID, I had to cancel the flight and the trip. And so I got to spend 2 weeks of doing other stuff. Hopefully they all caught fish.
And I hope you've recovered fully.
Yes. Yeah, it was, I've got 4 vaccinations, and the COVID was the latest version with a very heavy sore throat for three days, sniffling for 4 or 5 days, and then so it's gone. Thank you.
Well, glad that you're healthy and so on.
And Alan, your shoulder surgery recuperation seems to be going well there from the looks of things.
Well, don't tell my doctor, because I'm supposed to have my sling on, but I mean, really? They expect me to wear that thing for 6 weeks? Are you kidding? Anyway, whatever. I'm not a very good patient. So
not a patient, I guess.
I'm not a patient. That's a good way to put it.
Well, turning to the Dispatcher.
It does feel pretty good. And so, but I still haven't lifted my elbow. Okay.
And you can't drive yet, right? You're not supposed to drive yet. 2 different things, aren't they?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Okay.
You're terrible, Fred.
Sorry about that. The lead story in the August edition of The Dispatcher is headlined Mobility Implications of America's Anti-City Legacy, Different Shades of Urban, Part 2. Maybe to start, Michael, you can give us an overview. This is a continuation of something that you started writing about in the spring.
Yeah, late spring. The article in the late spring was how the difference between the primarily European cities and the U.S. American cities, and how it developed, how America got started in the 1600s, when the first wave of folks came over from mostly from Europe.
There were folks already over here that had cities. Correct?
I'm not going to go there.
We shan't talk about them, right? Because it is not pretty. It is not pretty. Okay, go ahead.
I'm not going to have that discussion.
Yes.
The cities that they had were of a different type, and the cities that evolved and developed when the first settlers from Europe came over and began to create cities were of a very different sort than those that had existed in Europe for a few thousand, mostly for a few thousand years. So that was that article, and then I had a few of the readers said, "Well, that's fine, but what does that actually mean? What are the implications of how the cities look and work, function in the United States compared with those in Europe? And what does that have to do with mobility? Are there really significant differences that affect the kind of transport mobility that the cities can provide?" And I said to them, yes, there are, and I'll take that up in one of the coming issues. And so I decided that August would be that issue. In brief, to summarize the first article, the cities that we created in the United States, except for two, perhaps three, being New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C., all developed in a way that brought the country in. They were not high density urban developments, either that started as fortresses and then expanded as many of the medieval cities in Europe, or which started as trading towns with a very dense core and then expanded beyond that into regions like London and Paris and many of the other cities. There were cities that we recognize because we grew up in them. I grew up in a single family house on a piece of land, and I can look across the polluted river and two sets of tracks and the gas works to the center of the city, which was only about quarter of a mile away as the crow flies. And that's not at all unusual. Scranton, Pennsylvania, Trenton, New Jersey, many of the cities that we see today still look the same way as they looked when they were developed in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And what I tried to do, and I hope I did, in this article, is to relate the size and the density, the two factors which I see as the primary functions of what make for a city which can provide mass transit or public transit. Most of our cities in the United States do not have any degree of density which would provide for a functioning transit system, as do many of the cities in Europe. So if you compare the cities, Brussels, Stockholm, Paris, London, etc., the density of those cities provide for a mass of people who are capable of riding primarily buses, but also underground systems like the London Underground, the Paris Metro, the Stockholm Tunnelbana, and the buses and the underground systems and the rail systems work together. They function as a team. The buses lead to the places where people need to get to in order to get to further places. This is very different from the pattern that developed in the US cities, where there was a core. From the core, there were lines that spread out, that provided for places that people could live to get away from the stench of the slaughterhouses, or the stench of the sulfur burning in calm dumps and from coal mining. And then the development that occurred as a result of that, building in the areas around that. So I guess the main point of the article is at least try to get people to start to accept the fact, maybe haven't thought about it before, but accept the fact that the United States isn't Germany, it isn't Sweden, it isn't the UK. It is in the forms of the cities and the way the cities have developed, single family, double duplexes, low densities. We don't have in the United States the same preconditions to provide for a functioning bus transit system in particular, and certainly not for light rail systems that people have decided they can get money for it and build in order to move people around. Yeah, that's what the point of the article is.
And
you've read it, so what do you
sure.
think?
Well, you're pointing out that that with few exceptions, these bus and rail systems haven't worked. And then you go further, and so you're advocating really a newer form of mobility, the kinds of things that we've talked about here.
Yeah, well, it's not new. I mean, the fact is that we've mixed up the cars working very well in American cities with cars caused all of the problems that they have with public transport. And now we have to solve those problems by pushing public transport back into these cities and getting the cars out of there. That's the kind of thinking we've got to get away from, because the cities aren't going to change. I mean, I gave the example of, if you want to build a city where public transport can work, then build it from scratch so that there is a density, that the public transport, buses and rail can work together and people can move around. But you don't do that by having 500 people per square mile or 2,000 people per square mile. You need the densities that exist. Well, they exist in Boston, they exist in New York, 3 times Boston or so. They exist in Washington, D.C., but those cities are older and they were built to a certain extent to provide that kind of density. Washington is really enclosed. It's rather high density, even though the large majority of the houses look like any street in Scranton or Trenton. But the houses are much more, they're closer together. There are lots of places where there isn't a garage, there isn't a driveway, like my nephew's house that I've shown in the example there. But as you go to all of these other cities, Phoenix, Los Angeles, the densities in those cities is just too low to provide for a solution that isn't related and isn't based on individual transport. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have everybody driving around in their own cars, although the majority of people will continue to do that because it works for them and it works for everybody else. But there are, as we've discussed many times, there are lots of folks who can't afford it, who don't have the possibility of having a car, but they're living in those cities and they need to get to where they need to get to. And that individual transport, and it's what we're proposing in the Trenton Moves project, where it's not buses, it's not buses with 60 or 80 people running around empty. It's cars that are able to pick people up, or small vehicles that are able to pick people up and take them where they need to go on a demand basis, and to do that efficiently and at much less cost than today's transit systems, particularly those that are being built based on rail.
It's even more than that. I think in what we propose for Trenton is that the vehicles sit around and wait for people to show up and then take them, as opposed to necessarily coming to pick them up right where they are. To me, that's kind of what my car does for me. It sits around and waits for me. I like to say it's sitting around like a little puppy dog, just waiting for me to use it.
Sure.
That is just such an enormous value concept, service concept to me, because anytime I want it, sure, it happens to be right outside my kitchen door. But even if it was a block and a half away, I can just walk a block or whatever away, hop in and go. People are tired of me saying that the elevator analogy is the analogy, but it's just the way an elevator is used in the building. You go in the front door and you go find the elevator bank, and either one's sitting there like a little puppy dog waiting to take you to where you want to go, or one comes soon. And this kind of mobility, this is the mobility that it's offered me as an individual and offered people. When one looks at real travel demand and so on. It's all about people wanting to go from a location to a location at a certain time. And it turns out that we're all different, and that is an enormously diffuse distribution. And unless you coalesce a lot of people and have few places for them to go, then the kinds of systems, conventional systems that have been laid out there with a line, with a few pearls of stops, then that works well. But that assumes that around those pearls, everything is kind of concentrated, and between them, there's nothing. And unfortunately, or fortunately, those that have owned the land between those pearls have decided, hey, come buy this land and do something with it. And the marketplace has responded, and built, and not just built around them. I mean, we supposedly have transit-oriented development around the Princeton Junction train station in West Windsor. They're building like townhouses and so on, enough concentration that would really allow for, Trenton train station or Trenton, the Princeton Junction train station to work really well. Unfortunately, between the housing and the train station, guess what there is? Huge parking lots. I mean, really, somebody's going to go, get a condo there and then have to walk across parking lots to go take the choo-choo. I mean, what are we trying to do? Insult them? Guess what they're going to do? They're going to go down to Tesla dealer, buy a Tesla, and then think they're saving the world by owning a Tesla because they're environmentally conscious. Who? I mean, it's like goofy. Why isn't the housing, if you're going to do this right around the train station, put the parking lots, let them go, out in hinterland. It's not what we've done. Apparently, it's not within so-called transit-oriented development. And if we don't even do that, I mean, we don't have a chance. We don't have a chance.
In the first article, I discussed where all this starts. I mean, the training that we get when we're in college. When I was at Princeton studying architecture,
is that my fault?
It's not necessarily your fault. You weren't affecting me at that point.
Ooh, I thought I was affecting you.
when we half of our professors were either from Argentina or Britain. We had a couple who drifted in from Germany. They had absolutely no conception of how American cities should or would work. If anybody mentioned the name Frank Lloyd Wright, they were put outside and had to stay out in a corner in the hall for half a semester, for saying something really stupid. I mean, if the whole concept of building around cities that developed in the way the cities were developed was just antithetical to their thinking. We had to change all of that. We had to create buildings, and we had to create parts of the cities which looked like Florence, and they looked like Athens, and they looked like Miletus, and that was the job that we had. We had to make our cities look like they weren't American cities anymore, and that we had to make people live like they weren't Americans, wanting to live and grill and have a car and do all this stuff. And I did one project. I had a professor whose name was Gunther Nietzsche. He was German, and he gave us a job. He gave us a project to design row housing. I mean, it was row housing, and so I did my row housing thing. So we had to stand up and we had a critique, and he looked at this and he said, "Where's the garage? Where's the driveway?" And I said, there isn't any garage. There's no driveway. Everybody, when we build this, everybody's going to have their own little helicopter. So you can see on the top of the building, there's a helicopter port. I mean, he looked at me like, what grade do you think you're going to get in this course? That was the end of the story. I mean, I was finished. On to the next one. If you question the whole concept of how things worked, you were just thrown out. So, and we had a couple of students in my class who were dedicated rightists, and they were just punished. They were pummeled every time they got, they showed something that it was like, come on, this isn't the way we do things here.
Wow.
You're on mute
you were
again.
so ahead on these vertical takeoff and landing proposals.
Yeah, right. I was just playing a smart ass, I guess.
My goodness, the smart cities concepts. I mean, you look at those things, I mean, they're like, what? Really? That's the way we want our cities to live. Maybe that's because, that's what they're building in China. I don't know what the heck. Maybe, but my goodness. And I think, Jim Hughes just put out, former dean of Blaustein School at Rutgers, just put out, demographics of New Jersey, the latest reports. It seems as if people thought or suggesting that young people want to be in those kinds of cities. Apparently not. And so, I don't know. It's sure if we define the land use and force everybody to, into that land use, we can make very efficient transportation systems, and we can put subways, and we can put buses and bus rapid transit and so on work. I don't know. It doesn't seem to me to be the way the marketplace is working. Okay. And at some point, I guess, some of this can be, shoved down our throat. At other times, the consumer stands up and say, no, I'm getting a place down here in Mays Landing. Thank you. See you guys.
I mean, if we continue to try to push people into places where they don't want to live, they're not going to live there, and they're not going to want to live there. And we've had all kinds of experiments and mostly with people who couldn't afford to make the choice. Yeah. But they made the choice. They decided they didn't want to live in Pruitt-Igoe. They decided they didn't want to live in places that were dreamt up by the Corbusiers and other radiant cityists who said, this is the way people should live. Maybe that's the way people could live and will want to live. But as it turns out, it certainly isn't. It's not the model that Sweden has followed. Sweden has followed a very similar approach after Stockholm and a few in Gothenburg, a very similar approach to the way America has developed. Most people live in single family houses. And if they can make a choice, it's a single family house far away from everyone else. And even if you go to Britain, and if you go outside of the major cities in France, you find the same thing. So I think we need to get people to start moving away from this dream idea, which now seems to have been taken to the absolute total extreme in Saudi Arabia with a 150 kilometer linear city where everybody's going to live in a line so that you can have high-speed rail connecting one end to the other. In fact, that's not a new idea. It was proposed by a couple of Princeton architects back just before I arrived there, from Boston down to Washington. It was it was the line, and you know who they were? Peter Eisenman and Michael Graves. Lovely people.
Yeah.
I like them a lot.
May they rest in peace.
They influenced my thinking.
I think again, we can complain about the car, and we can do a lot of complaints about it, and it might be nice to be able to walk to everything that you need to go get, or just bicycle. But given the number of people that we're dealing with, and given the availability of land, at least still reasonable land here in the US of A, it seems as if you just look at where the construction's going. You look at what what's happening in Texas. People are just like moving everywhere, and they're not moving in a linear city and concentrated so that you can run a whatever. Somebody wants a contract to build a high-speed rail line, yeah, or they want to build the Purple Line, in Maryland. I mean, come on, are you really okay? I mean, it's just a bunch of people who want a paycheck. It's not to really provide mobility for anybody. The ridership on these systems is, oh my goodness. And somehow, we've sort of suggested that, these are really poor people that want to ride this thing, and therefore we should provide some subsidy for them and build that for them. But when you look at it, I mean, doesn't provide mobility for where they might want to come from and go to.
No.
Which is what the moves concept focuses on.
Yeah, I know. And
exactly.
I just don't want to sell the moves concept. This is just a general, feeling about that. And I think, to me, why do I keep talking about this is I think the opportunity with automation is you can provide an auto-like level of service, a vehicle waiting around to serve people, and an opportunity to take them from almost anywhere where they are to almost anywhere where they want to go, much like my car does, for really little money.
Yep.
Okay, because the only reason the car works for me, or the only reason the car works for you, Fred, or you, Michael, is because you do it for yourself. It's a do-it-yourself. It's a Home Depot problem. Okay, you're providing the mobility for yourself.
We like to call it, it's the IKEA solution.
Oh, okay. I know. Well, we're home to pot here, so excuse me. But yeah, no. So yeah, sure. Okay. And somehow, the whole process, because the folks have been behind, we think that if you do this one for yourself, I mean, you almost feel good. It's not only doing it for yourself, but you're getting enjoyment out of it too. I mean, the amount of enjoyment I'm getting in driving my own car these days is waning. Now, maybe when I was 16, of course, and maybe many years in between, but I guess right now it seems to be more of a pain in the butt than anything else. And my goodness, if we had to pay ourselves to do these things, many of us couldn't afford it. Okay. But since we're doing it for ourselves, great. Well, what the driverless systems allow then is allow that same do it for yourself, because of course the thought is, which the theory may be wrong on this, is this with any kind of scale, that automated systems, its cost goes to zero. Okay. And when it sits around and waits for you, it doesn't sit there and need to go to the bathroom or, take a vacation or be fed or sleep. It just sits there and waits, again, like a little puppy dog, just waiting to provide a service and not caring if you're late, early, or indifferent. I don't know.
And the interesting thing is, in New Jersey, at least, where we've been talking about it initially in Trenton, that we're seeing other communities springing up really wanting to get in on this. They love the idea.
I don't know. It seems that they certainly like the idea. They don't want a shuttle circulating, who knows what on the schedule. They think it's, I don't know. But again, maybe, I'm enormously biased, so maybe I'm not seeing it well. But we have real interest here, and it just shocks me that nobody in the industry says, hey, maybe there's a market for this in New Jersey. All right. No, we're not Abu Dhabi. Okay. No, we're not, who knows what, laden with money just to give you for a toy. No, we don't just have, an expense account that we can just appropriate to this to take us, and so that I can take a selfie of myself as I'm going to Newark Airport and send it to my wife. Look, hey, look, Elizabeth. I mean, and people, at least that's what I don't know. Again, people are getting tired of me saying it, but It's what I see.
Well, we will be back, but this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, you can go to motoetf.com. On the website, look for the white paper called The Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under the Insights and News tab. Some great information there to help you make informed decisions about investing. ETFs, as you probably know, can be a good way to spread risk with investments, maybe focus on a particular category of stocks. The website, again, is motoetf.com. We are back with more of Smart Driving Cars and our guest, Michael Sena. Michael, there were some other topics you covered in the latest Dispatcher. One, you take a look at the U.S. Supreme Court, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the New York State's handgun carry regulations, the ruling that the EPA does not have the authority to set national energy policy regulating carbon emissions. And you're pointing out, I think, if I'm reading it right, that the court has put the issues in the hands of Congress and the president here.
Well, it's where they should have been from the first place. I mean, it's the more we see of how the Congress, the president, the executive, and the judicial, the congressional branches of government are functioning. I mean, if there's one thing that's happened during these last, let's say, almost 6 years now, is that they've highlighted where the dysfunction exists in the United States in governmental system. One of the things that has been overused almost from the start, it's nothing new. George Washington had the possibility of delivering executive orders, and they've been used over the course of the history of the United States. And basically what they do is that they allow the president or the executive branch to bypass the Congress. And this is what was done with the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency. There were laws that were passed. Those laws were interpreted as being applying to whatever the EPA would be doing. But as time went on, the EPA has taken more and more authority. And what the Supreme Court has done is said, you have taken more authority than the laws that are on the books gave you, and so we're going to take that away. Now, if you as an authority, or you as an organization that's been set up by the executive branch, want to continue what you're doing, you're going to have to do it at the will of the Congress, not at the will of the president. And what I say in the article is, I believe the EPA has outlived its usefulness. It should be more than it is. It shouldn't just be something that's existing and running around and flying underneath the radar and doing as much as it possibly can do without having the legal responsibility and authority to do that. There's the EPA, or what the agency has become, should be at a cabinet level. There should be a secretary. It could be part of another call it ministry. It could be part of another department, or it could be on its own. But there should be a group of people who are responsible for the environment. And right now, it's spread around, and it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing in any way. So the point of the article, and I think I've mentioned this in a number of other articles, we have to look at what's going on behind the scenes. We have to look at the backstory, and the backstory of what's going on in the environment, which has an enormous impact on the automobile industry, is what's going on in the Federal Trade Commission, what's going on in the Securities Exchange Commission, what's going on in the EPA, and a lot of these agencies that are not mandated by laws. So I think it was a very good thing that the Supreme Court did what it did on this particular subject, and I think it's now incumbent on both the president and the Congress to do something about it, to finally do the right thing. This has been going on for 50 years now.
So your point might be that it is not anti-environment as long as the legislative bodies and the president pick up the ball.
It's not. This is not an anything. This is, look, this is the way we interpret the law. The law. This is what we do. This is what the Supreme Court, as I said in the title, the Supreme Court doesn't make laws. It shouldn't make laws, but it's been doing that. Roe versus Wade was the Supreme Court essentially making a law. The Congress never did anything about it. And the other interpretations of, what is the law? Where is the law? Now we're pointing back to a specific law, or we're pointing back to what the Constitution has said. There's nothing in the Constitution about any of this stuff. It's all been, we think this is what we could have possibly believed, but we're not really sure. So in the old days, when the court was progressive, because it was filled by presidents who wanted progressive justices, it interpreted things one way, and we got Roe versus Wade. Now, after a couple of years with some other guy, the last POTUS, they're interpreting it another way, and this is not necessarily right or wrong. It's just the way it is, and the interpretations that they're making have resulted in these rulings, and one of those rulings is on the EPA.
Well, another topic that you dive into is what's going on at Volkswagen. They have they're ousting the CEO, and you take a look at some of the story behind it.
Yeah, I've said oftentimes in discussing Volkswagen moved very, very quickly into electrification, and I'm convinced that the reason they did that was to try to deflect all of the arrows that were being aimed at them, and many of them being shot at them as a result of their stupidity and with the diesel emissions. Dieselgate. So deflect. We're going to do electric, and they quickly put in Dies, and look, he came from another company. He's Austrian. He's not German. He came from BMW, a competitor to a certain extent, although they don't necessarily see themselves. Audi sees BMW as a competitor, but not VW. So he was always could be the scapegoat. And it just got to the point where the way that he was dealing with things was definitely not the German way. And it was, I guess they finally understood that he didn't have the support of the unions. He didn't have the support of many of the people working in the company. And finally, he lost the support of the families that own the majority of the shares. So he's out. But this is probably not going to make much of a difference. They continue to do with what they've been doing, and I think the main thing that the next focus is going to be on the reason that they said he's got to go now, because it was their software development group that they spent a lot of time and a lot of money to build, to say that we're going to do all of this in-house. We're not going to depend on outside sources, because that's the way Tesla does it. We're going to do all of this in-house. I believe that's the correct way to do it. But I've also seen how bad the worst that can possibly happens when you've got it all in-house, because you can't throw them out and you're stuck. You can't just go from one to the other and say, fix this, bring in a new group of people. Although Volvo, to a certain extent, had to do that, and they had to do it very, very quickly. But I think that's where most of this started, with the Cariad development group, IT development group.
So Michael, on that one, why is it that software in the auto industry can't be delivered by the by the suppliers. I mean, they get everything else from suppliers. They get their tire, their tier one suppliers. They get their tires, their headlights, their leather, their you know, their I don't know, transmissions, their struts, their, you know, all the other things they get from the so-called tier ones and then tier twos. What's happening on the chipset level, the software level? Is there a difference here?
Yeah, there
you
is.
know, over you know.
Yeah, chipset to a certain extent, we can bring this in the chip design. We can bring that in as well, but you have to go back to the 90s, the early 90s, mid 90s, when the car companies were told by the consultants, you've got to focus on your core business. And they convinced the car companies that their core business was not even assembling cars.
I was going to say assembling cars, but
Yeah.
Go ahead. Not even assembling cars.
Not even assembling cars.
What is the core business then?
And this is the problem.
Yeah.
Nobody could explain to the people who are outside the car industry that everything that they were doing was core business, and nobody inside the car industries were capable of understanding what their core business was once they outsourced everything. You know, they're all looking around saying, well, you know, we don't own the dealers, we don't own except in Europe, many of them do. We don't, you know, we don't make our tires, we don't make our brake pads. And then starting around in the 90s and the early 2000s, more and more of the functions of the car were handed over to software, and the car companies didn't have software development.
Did that come out of the Japanese model, the Toyota model? No, I mean,
no,
you know,
no.
Where did that come from?
The Japanese were really late to the party when it came to software, and still are behind the 8 ball in many ways. The car companies, principally BMW, Mercedes, to a certain extent Volvo, but principally BMW and Mercedes, began to work very closely with their tier one companies, because they saw more and more of the functions that were going into the cars as being software dependent. They did not have software. They didn't have software groups. Remember that Ford and Delphi, Ford and General Motors, as well as Volkswagen, had taken their electronics group and outsourced them, or pushed them out
to the Delphis
places
of this world.
Yeah, exactly. And those companies weren't software developers either. So that anyone that potentially had the possibility of doing this were outside. Delphi was a very good example, because when General Motors developed OnStar, they depended on their old, you know, Delphi group to develop the software for them, as well as one of the IT developers.
Not to interrupt you, but going back to the electrical systems, used to be really tough, especially for the British companies. I mean, you know, I had an Austin Healey 3000. I loved the car. I was under it more than I was in it, and the electrical systems and those things were. Is that what the Delphis really succeeded in doing? And when they did the electrical systems or whatever, then they basically took over, or what? Or is that just my personal whatever?
No, the whole thing with English cars is, you know, we could spend hours just talking about it. I owned a Ford Cortina, and it was, you know, I went through, I don't know how many batteries I went through at Sears Roebuck.
But the Saab had its own problem. The Saab, I called it Saab, but go ahead.
I didn't have any problems with my Saab.
Whatever.
The car companies did not have just when they began to outsource everything, the IT input became more important.
Right.
So they had no choice at that point but to find companies that could provide this for them. The problem with that is if you've got an IT company that's doing your development work and they're doing the same development work for someone else, you've taken your core capabilities, put it in the hands of someone else who will then use the same, the same heads to provide it for others. And you just can't do that. You're competing. You have to be competing on something.
Henry Ford would have never done that, right?
And of course, and neither has Tesla. So everyone now that's then looking at this and seeing, Tesla's selling a lot of cars. They're selling a hell of a lot more cars than we Volvo or we Jaguar or we lots of other companies. And it's vertically integrated. We should be doing the same thing. But having people to manage that, having people who understand how this works and manage it is extremely difficult. So Dees didn't like the way things were being managed by the head of the Audi group, and he says, "Well, I'm much better at managing things, so I'm going to manage this himself." And so he got himself in a big pile of doo-doo, because right then it all blew up. They were late. Bentley's not delivering the car that they were supposed to be delivering. So this is not a slam dunk. And unfortunately, the car companies continue to make the same mistakes. I saw it firsthand.
Where do you see then the companies Intel, Mobileye, and NVIDIA? I mean, they've stepped up here and are providing a lot of the technology, are they not, to various companies, automakers?
Yeah, Intel, Mobileye, I don't. NVIDIA is a good example of a company that is capable of providing a foundation for an onboard system. Whether companies are going to allow them to take over the management of all of the systems with a single function or a single operating computer that controls everything in the vehicle, the way the Tesla computer controls everything in the vehicle, is something that's still questionable. I mean, if I were Volvo, if I were Audi, I certainly wouldn't want to have a company with that capability. Just like I wouldn't want to have Google running all of my infotainment and navigation system operating systems. I wouldn't want to do that. I would want as a car company to do that myself. But if I make that decision, I can't make it in isolation. I have to look at the entire company. What am I doing with everything? And this is really difficult for companies to do, especially companies like General Motors and Ford, who've been in the business of making cars for a long time, to be able to make this transition.
It's really difficult for them because they had their business model, especially in the 80s and in the 90s, and when all the software stuff was really starting to go, I mean, really get big, their business model was completely different than what the software entities, the Moore's Law folks were doing. The simple illustration that I present is that for years we had at Princeton, we had General Motors providing full rides to at least a couple of students per year, as long as they went and did summer internships at General Motors. And the reason why they were doing that, I think, whatever, I may have it wrong, was because they wanted to hire these folks when they came out of Princeton. Okay, they wanted to be first in line. This is what I called Gold Mine Sucks does all the time, and J.P. Morgan and so on. They give all my students summer internships, and then they put golden handcuffs on them. And guess what? Those golden handcuffs go in, and they go to work for those folks, or they go to work for NVIDIA, or they go to work for Intel and so on, or whatever. And what happened was that the students went out to General Motors and spent their interns and came back to Princeton. They took those handcuffs off immediately. Essentially, none of them went went to work for General Motors. Okay, so in some sense, why? Because the compensation part, it was thought to be, you have to be there 20 years before you get to do something serious. I mean, the whole employment process. Now this goes back 30 years, 35. Maybe I'm too old. Whatever. I'm not so sure they've necessarily changed that. There, it doesn't seem to be where at least many of my students want to go work.
Well, let's talk about GM since we've opened the can of worms.
Maybe Michael wants to provide a comment on that one. I don't know.
No, I don't.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, this week GM said that it lost $500 million on Cruise during the second quarter, over $5 million a day. During the first 6 months of this year, the losses came to $900 million, 100 million shy of $1 billion. But CEO Mary Barra is saying that she is still bullish and reaffirmed a forecast that this unit could generate $50 billion a year from automated vehicle services and technology by 2030. And I know I've seen some emails flying back and forth. Alan, you and many others have some eyebrows raised over this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reality that's put out there. I don't want to say, GM lost, $5 million a day. GM has an entity that is spending $5 million a day. Okay, I think that's what they're spending because of course they haven't provided a balance sheet for that entity, so one can't see the revenue side. That the $5 million a day is a net minus expenditure, but I think that the revenue side is zero.
They're charging a few people for rides, I think now. So, but
it's zero.
It's not much.
I don't know. Somebody will correct me. And of course, in a sense, this is what startups and so on are all about. They're not about getting revenue. They're about creating something that will eventually generate revenue. Okay. So, nothing against the model really, although it's never been my theory on all this stuff. And so, but if you then say that by 2030, you're going to end up with a positive number out there, you're still going to have expenses. Even if you take your expenses to zero, you can't get to the positive one until you have revenue. And it doesn't seem to me that they've started focusing on a revenue model. Yes, Adam Jonas has put it out there, among others, how, providing mobility is a $1 trillion business. And of course, I believe I support what Adam and others have put out. People are willing to probably pay $1 a ride. Now that we've had inflation, maybe it's $10 a ride. I don't know how much inflation's been, but yeah, $1 a mile. And you look at the number of miles people go and so on. This is kind of what people pay. I mean, this is what we sort of pay, although we don't realize it. Okay, because everybody wants to make sure that of course the perception is, my goodness, you don't want to put that in people's faces. But if you want to tap that, you have to get to a point in which you're focused on revenue, building a business out of mobility. Now, maybe the value comes in that all the developments by Cruise end up being in your electric Hummer. I mean, really, we're going to electric vehicles that look like a tank? But anyway, never mind. I don't want to get to the Hummer thing. But and all these things will sell Hummers, and therefore, Cruise will deserve some of the revenue attributions associated with selling Hummers. I don't know. I mean, it's maybe.
Well, 2030 is pretty close. I mean,
look, I mean, what are we? We're 2022 and a half.
Yeah.
2030 happens in 6.5, right? Because, it starts then. I don't know if we want to go the whole end, whatever, however you want to count. Okay, but it's less than 2 handfuls. And sure, yes, I believe in J curves. Okay, I believe in them, but you end up needing exponential coefficients on those J curves that look like who pretty soon. And we've been in this, business since 2005, give or take, whatever we want to take as DARPA challenges, or 2009 when Google decided to really go into it. So we've been in this 13 years plus 15. There should be some revenue. There should be some revenue. Yes, there is some revenue. People are buying into intelligent cruise control and maybe automated emergency braking systems that work, that are provided by whom? I guess the tier 1 suppliers. I guess GM's developing itself, but I think that's Super Cruise, I think, is separate from Cruise.
The whole advanced driver assistance systems it's been going on for the last 20 years. There are companies that are doing this. All of the companies from GM and Ford to everyone.
Mercedes,
I met them all a couple of weeks ago in Brussels. Their 20th anniversary of the Audaces Forum. They're doing fine. Yeah. This Cruise is not part of this group.
Right.
Neither is Argo, neither is Zoox, none of these companies are part of this. They all decided that they were going to do something that was completely different, completely separate. They were going to develop a car that drove itself. Instead of starting, this is what has baffled me from the start and continues to. Instead of starting with, we have all of these functions that are working. Let's base our systems on these functions. And Tesla is a great example, which means a very, very bad example of not following and using everything that had been developed over the years and building on it. Nope, let's start from scratch. We're going to build our own piece of junk, and we're going to let people die using our own piece of junk, which is what they're doing. And I don't want to say that Cruise is doing the same thing, because Cruise has had a very rough patch over the last 3 or 4 months, with cars stopping in the middle of the road and cars banging into other cars and so on. But this really isn't a discussion about Cruise. This is a discussion about General Motors, and in the end, it's a discussion about the CEO of General Motors and the board of directors of General Motors. What in God's name are these people doing? What Mary Barra, shows up like she's with her leather coat, looking like she's, one of the gang, one of the Facebook alphabet. I'm part of this business, and General Motors isn't in that business. General Motors goes out of business if it stops selling cars. It's got to sell cars. It's got to produce cars that people want to drive, and they're going to produce cars that people want to continue to own and operate. So at some point in time, I think the stock, over the last year, the stock has halved. It was great for her while the stock was going up, with all of the hype around the stuff that looked like GM was at the top of the curve, not at the bottom. It's not going to continue. Somebody's got to say to General Motors, and this whole business about running a board of directors like it's a university that has to toe the line on Title IX. It's General Motors needs to have people who are competent. Meg Whitman, I guess she did okay in some ways, but I mean she'd be the last person that I would put on the board of a company, that automobile company, that needs to be global, that needs to be working in an industry. She has absolutely no competence in this area, and a number of the other board people. So having diversity on the board, if that's the only thing that you're trying to do, you're not going to stay in business long enough. And the amount of money that they're putting into cruise, they could stop that tomorrow and put that money into places where they're going to, where they're going to produce better cars, more effective mobility with the cars that they have, rather than wasting money on what cruise is doing.
But Michael, I think we, certainly me, have been saying that there are two businesses here. There's a mobility business and there's a sell cars business. And if your business is to sell cars to me or you or to people, that's a completely different business in some sense than giving a ride to me or to you. It really is.
It is.
Okay.
Of course it is.
It's, and the selling of cars, of course, these folks have been in this business. That business case has been around for 100+ years.
Yeah.
And they do it very well, and they've done it very effectively. And look, the market has responded. Every one of us that could afford one of these things, essentially every one of us that could afford it, one of these things, has bought in on it and bought it and like it and so on. It's a whole different business if now you're going to look at giving people rides and asking for money in return.
Yeah, and if you look at what BMW and Mercedes have gone through, they went through this idea that we're going to be a mobility business. We're in the mobility business.
Yeah.
And they started these car sharing and all kinds of things. And where are they today? Where have those gone? Nowhere.
Nowhere.
They've sold them all.
Yeah. They've all disappeared. They're all who knows what. They're all struggling and so on and so forth. It hasn't worked. I think there is a business for somebody to deliver mobility. There is a taxi service. There is a public transportation service. There is a service to deliver mobility. But I think the only way you can do that and survive is to look at the labor cost of the way it's been done.
Yep.
And decide that, hey, I'm going to replace that labor with computers. And if that causes problems, we're going to solve. But there is no way to do it with paying a labor cost. Uber and Lyft can't do it. They can't. Otherwise, they would be so successful now. They can't charge enough to give a living wage to a sufficient number of people to do that, except for in the places like, Elizabeth and I went to the AV conference in Anaheim, or next to Anaheim. I don't even know, Garden City or whatever they call it. We had to get from LAX to the hotel. Okay. Uber quote at the airport at LAX, $75. Hey, I'm on an expense account. What do I care? By the time we walk over to the place to get into the Uber car, it was $150. Of course we got in. What do I care? I'm not paying for it. Of course I care, but I really don't care. Okay. If I had to pay the $150 out of my pocket, I would have walked probably. I mean, I'm such a cheap guy. I mean, so sure, there exist pockets of mobility that you can offer to those who, for which price doesn't matter. For most other folks, if you really want to build a business out of this, if you really want some volume, price matters.
Yeah.
And $150, are you joking? Now on the way back, because we got an Uber from the hotel to Elizabeth's father's house in Brentwood, is even farther than going back, because we weren't dealing with airports and so on. That thing was priced at like $63. All right. Now, I guess, and that poor guy who drove us, I guess he didn't get as much for that ride than the guy who took us from the airport. He's got to get some airport rides in order to make enough to feed his family. And this is to run a marketplace like that. Why don't you look at the largest cost of doing that, which is the cost of the driver? Not that we don't want to employ people and pay them high salaries so that they can feed their families. Well, let them do. They're going to have to do something else. Okay. We have very few toll takers on the New Jersey Turnpike anymore.
There's one.
Yeah, there's one. Okay.
Yeah. I found her.
You found her. Yeah. There used to be tons of them. We used to have to wait in line to give money to New Jersey Turnpike Commission. What kind of business do you make your customers wait in line to give you money? I mean, fundamental, lemonade stand 101 tells you, don't do that. Okay, that's not good service. Sorry, I don't know. Maybe I just need to teach a course on lemonade stand.
We started talking about cruise, and we got into to General Motors, and then we got over to running a taxi business. There's not a single car manufacturing company that's in the taxi business.
Probably shouldn't be.
Well, that's why they're not in the taxi business.
Yeah, right.
They shouldn't.
They decided that.
Well, isn't that what they're talking about with the robo taxis, though?
Exactly.
Talking about
everybody who's what these companies are talking about, becoming a mobility as a service company. General Motors, Mercedes, BMW, all of these companies saying, we are now mobility providers, are essentially saying we're going to be in the taxi business. Now, they've never been in the taxi business, but now they're going to be in the taxi business because this is where they believe the money is going to be made. In the end, the car companies are going to make money by selling cars. And if anyone is taught that lesson that was learned 100 years ago, it's been the Musketeer. You make money by selling more cars. You don't sell cars, your stock doesn't go up. I don't get to go to Mars and do all the other stuff that I do because I've got lots of money, and we've been reading a lot about that as well. Get real. If you want to keep your job, start making better cars, start selling more cars, start competing on the basis of having good cars that people want to buy. Otherwise, all of this business about diversity of the board of directors and sustainability and all of that crap, it's just not going to cut it. So my advice to Mrs. Barra is don't wind up like Mr. Deese.
But there is a market for so-called robo-taxi service.
I don't know there
providers.
is. I don't know that there's a market for robo-taxis. I'm absolutely certain that there's a market for a shuttle service that can provide rides for people who don't have their own cars.
Well, that I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
I guess
market for that kind of transportation.
In my looking at it, and of course I am so biased, nobody should pay any attention to me. But I am my looking at mobility of people in Trenton. Who would take this? Okay, I think 80% of the kids who live more than a half mile away from their school. Okay, if the price is right. All right, almost anybody that's living in Trenton, that's commuting to Manhattan, that's commuting to Newark, or that's commuting to, within walk access of any of the rail stations, the many rail stations that are a direct connection from the Trenton Transit Center, which includes the River Line. And if you look at the work patterns of people that live in Trenton, there are a number of those folks. Why? Because unless they can walk to the Trenton train station, they have to take their car and park it there. The parking ends up costing you something. And that parking ends up really being a whole heck of a lot more than what it would cost you to provide the mobility, if the software worked, to and from the station. Yeah, and to make sure that mobility is available to you when you want to go and when you want to return. So it meets every train at the train station.
Yeah.
There are 4,000 such people that live in Trenton. That's 8,000 person trips a day market potential. Are you telling me that having an elevator-like service to and from their neighborhoods to the Trenton train station, you aren't going to pick up 50% of them? Cut it out. They're not idiots.
So let me throw out then that for both of you, why shouldn't it be Cruise, GM Cruise, providing that service if it can be profitable?
Well, I think so, but they don't pay any attention to us. They want to go, take people from downtown Phoenix to Phoenix International Airport and charge them who knows what because they're on an expense account. Okay, great. How many of those folks are there? Great. I don't think you can be profitable doing that. I certainly don't think you can return to your investors what they expect to have as a return. And I don't think you get to $50 billion or whatever the number that Mary said in 2030 by doing that.
Neither Cruise nor General Motors are in the business of providing rides to people in places like Trenton or Scranton or Paterson, New Jersey, or any place else. Cruise is in the business of developing a software stack and hardware concept, not even a production model, but a hardware concept that can be used by someone to produce vehicles that can do that job. They're the tool maker, but they're not the manufacturer. They're not the craftsman who's going to use the tool. They're not the company who's going to put the tools in place and produce product that they're going to sell. It's not their business. Neither GM nor Cruise are in that business. That's the answer. That's
I would
my
like
answer
to find
the
one who is in that business.
Well, there isn't anybody.
Baidu last week announced that they're going to make a vehicle that is whatever for $37,000. Now, I can't imagine how much.
Did they call you yet, Alan?
No, I mean, I said, call me. Okay, all right. I can write a check for 100 of those suckers. Okay, all right. And if the darn thing works, I can make that work in Trenton, and I think I can become rich guy. So I'll buy the next 1,000, the next 10,000, the next 100,000 that I put throughout New Jersey. Am I going to put 10 million in New Jersey? No, because I don't need 10 million. Okay, probably just need a couple 100,000 or a couple 100,000. Yeah. Probably get, I don't know, serve, 5 million person trips a day, make $1 off each one, make $1 off each one, make $1 after expenses. I don't know. I get it. I get a Gulf Stream out of that. It's going to be a lot of work, but I just think that's doable. None of these, none of them have ever published a revenue model that I've seen. Hey, please, I hope, send me one. I'd like to look at it.
Well, Uber had produced a lot of paper, including revenue model itself.
Yeah, but it was all assuming that they would have an automated vehicle and they weren't paying gig workers.
Yeah.
How can you run a company with gig workers? How can you manage those cats? I mean, that managing it's tough enough managing employees. Managing gig workers, what kind of carrots do you have to hang out there in front of them to make them do what you want to do?
Yeah.
The whole advantage of doing it with a computer is that I or my students, we can write code and the computer says, yeah, I'll do it. That's the only reason this makes sense. Otherwise, oh my goodness, what do you have to do? just to be able to deal with the diversity issue. There's no diversity issue in dealing with a computer. At least one hasn't thought of one yet. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. And it's not that I want people to have jobs. I want to create employment. I want people to feed their families. But, as toll takers on the New Jersey Turnpike, no. As drivers for empty buses, no. I don't know. Oh man, yep. all the people that are gonna now. Oh,
well, terrific discussion once again, Michael. We want to thank you for spending the time with us once again.
Pleasure.
Always. The website is michaellsena.com. That's where you're going to find the dispatcher. Sign up, read it. You won't be sorry. Thank you also to our sponsor, the Smart ETFs, Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO, and more info is available at motoetf.com. Technical support is provided by CARTS, the Corporation for Automated Road Transportation Safety, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to safe and high-quality mobility for all. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, Spreaker, wherever you turn to for podcasts. You can ask your smart speaker to play us too, if you've got one. You can find my tech reports at techstination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with Alain Kornhauser. Thanks for listening or watching. Please continue to stay safe.
And thank you. And we apologize for bombarding everyone. This is not easy. This is not easy, and this is not easy. And we've made enormous progress technologically. We've got to make enormous progress sociologically. And of course, we have to make a business out of it. Because if it isn't a business, then there won't be any lemonade for any of us to consume at any lemonade stands. I mean, it's just, and so anyway, that's what we're trying to do, stimulate a discussion, trying to make it happen.